from the late 19th century and all through the 20th century, that relation has become completely reversed. And linguistics of the 20th century, by and large, is writing-based. It starts from writing as though that were the kind of unproblematic form. Behind it stands an assumption which Bloomfield kind of first stated in the 1920s, which is that writing is the transcription of speech, which certainly wasn't the case anymore, but that kind of stood. So therefore, you could take writing to be like speech. In other words, ignore all the differences. And then the linguists looked at writing in order to develop their grammars of languages. Of course, when they came across hundreds of languages, they had to go back and do different kinds of things. And so the history of writing-based linguistics and the history of the linguistics which was seeking to establish itself as a discipline separate from, say, anthropology or from psychology, led to a notion of writing as central and as kind of primary and as the basis on which you build your grammars. Of course, when you build your grammar on writing, then when you apply that grammar to speech, what you'll find is that speech never matches to the grammar which you've described from the basis of writing. And hence, anybody who's confronted with that, a transcription of their speech, for instance, mine now, confronted would say, does it sound like that? I mean, this is completely ungrammatical. Rather than saying these are quite separate systems of representation and need their own means of representing, you can't simply take something which may serve reasonably well for writing and use it as a means of describing speech because they are entirely different. But as I was trying to show in my previous sort of succession of examples, what we have now is writing with speech and of course with many other modes. So these things now coexist. So if you have a CD-ROM now of a novel like Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, what you'll have is the written text, you'll have little bits of spoken text, you'll have of course the one that I've seen, you have little cartoon strips which show kind of illustrate scenes from the novel. You have bits of film clips. You've got little songs from the period sort of interspersed with it. You know, you've got a highly multimodal kind of thing. So writing now occurs with these other modes. Now, one interesting thing that happens in that change, writing from the medium of the book, the dominance of print, to writing in the medium of some screen-based form. Say, for instance, the notion of character. You've got two main characters, Lenny and who's the other person in Mice and Men? George, yeah. And they sit by they sit by. Thank you very much. It is, however, your cultural heritage, so you're responsible for it. They sit by a campfire. Yeah? In the novel, it says they sit by the campfire and something or other. The moment you draw it, you've got to draw, and I talked about this yesterday, this epistemological commitment. You can't just say they sat by the campfire, you have to show how they sat. There's one on this side, one on this side, or were they kind of sitting like this, close together? How were they sitting? And that immediately kind of adds something to the meaning of the novel, which wasn't in the novel. Yeah? About affect, how they felt about each other at this particular moment, who is supporting who, George supporting Lenny, and those kinds of things suddenly have to be stated, which before they weren't. In other words, in the translation from the single mode to the multi-mode, things have to be expressed, which previously could be left unexpressed and left to your imagination to fill. It's also, of course, a translation of media from book to the CD-ROM. So, again, something happens here to our engagement with writing, because we've got other kinds of things which tell us what Lenny looked like and what George looked like. It tells us how close they sat at the fire, which the novel didn't do. But something else also happens. The nature of the novel as a genre is changing entirely when you have little diaries of people who lived in the period and worked as farm labourers in the Californian kind of orchard or whatever it was. When you have little diaries there, you've got songs from the period, you've got, but suddenly the novel is no longer a novel. And the notion of character changes from the notion of character as it is in a novel, whatever purpose character has in the novel, it changes to something much more like, I don't know, a person you might meet in the street. So something changes in there. These shifts from writing from single mode to multi-mode, from the medium of the book to the medium of the screen. Just a brief, this is not in any way meant to be exhaustive, but I just want to go back to some things I've just mentioned. So writing has the resources of lexis, that is, you have names, which you use for naming things, but you can also make names, and I'll show an example of that. And syntax is a means of making these single snapshots of the world, these clauses, into complex things, if you want to, or leaving them simple, depending on what your interest is or what your intended audience is, what kinds of things you have in mind. And then this question of social resources again, and I'm thinking very much of Anna Chapman. What sort of resources she had, what resources Milton had, in order to make the linguistic. Well, I won't go over that again, but just to say, she kind of draws from what she hears in church, what she hears in these religious communities where she's a member, and how one talks there. There are sort of snatches where you hear her mother talking or her father talking. Snatches where she talks about herself in ways that you would talk about in Stepney, which even then was a kind of a very much a working class area. So these kinds of things, what social resources do you have to bring into the writing that you're doing? Of course, these are central questions in literacy, teaching and research at the moment. And what I do want to show is this resource which I mentioned, the resource of syntax and what you can do with it. Some years ago I happened to be somewhere as a visitor, and in fact an American scholar who was doing mass media studies was also there as a scholar, and he was writing this book, and he asked me if I would read sort of draft chapters of his book, and I gladly did. But at the same time, I had been asked to write something about sentences and punctuation. And so, of course, I looked at these sentences with two eyes. One as a sort of a kind of a fellow colleague in a friendly way, and another as a kind of a linguist saying what's going on here. The sentence which is bolded here was in his manuscript. That rejection of something or other in theory, casts us out to sea on the question of what might that relationship be. And I thought, it struck me as a slightly awkwardly sort of framed sentence, but I thought, where does it come from? It's got the sources of different types, and so I've constructed a hypothetical sort of origin for this sentence. That rejection of, say, some theoretical term casts us out to sea on the question of what might that relationship be. And I thought, it has probably three sources at least, like the rejection casts us out to sea, although rejection is already a nominalization, somebody rejects something. And then it has another source, which is someone asks a question, and the question itself, which is what might that relationship be. And out of these kind of three sources, the syntax of English gives you the means, like we have that complex sentence, gives you the means of constructing something more complex in your kind of development of a theory. And I sort of constructed a little history of how this might have gone, and how it might have gone further. No need to stop where it did stop. So